Now, the mental state of any individual contributes to his or her general well-being, and anything that affects the mental health of a person is sure to impact the individual's health. This is because the state of a person's mind is crucial to his general health. In today's world, many factors can affect a person's mental health, from family to environment, health challenges, social issues, financial constraints, poverty, and others. This is why depression, which is classified as a mood disorder, has become quite common. It may be described as feelings of sadness, loss, or anger that interfere with a person's everyday activities. The key to maintaining a healthy mental state largely depends on a person's ability to balance and manage all of life's situations. Joining me to talk more on this is emotional intelligence expert, Tosin Imogema. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thanks for having me.
So, how does one get to know or understand that perhaps they are depressed? Because over time, since the pandemic, we have recorded more persons saying that they have been depressed as a result of the lockdowns and measures put in place, social distancing, no much gathering and all of it. And you also hear persons, committing suicide. But our focus is not on suicide, rather depression that perhaps leads to suicide.
Yeah, of course it does.
So let's focus on how do people get to understand that this is depression, you are getting depressed.
Yeah, by definition, depression is when you have a prolonged state, a prolonged state of mind where you are depressed, or where you're where you're sad, where you have your mood is pretty low, and it goes on for about 2 weeks. So if you know that you're in this constant state of sadness, despair, loss of enthusiasm for life, and you do not want to participate in your normal daily activities, even sometimes you just lose, you can't find motivation, to get up from the bed in the morning to go to work or do things that usually you find pleasure in, then of course you can't term that state as, depression. So it has to be for a prolonged.
But are there triggers to this depression? Because I'm wondering, do people just get sad for no reason?
Well, people do not get sad for any reason. The thing is, it begins with the thoughts, the mindsets. Every emotional state comes from a component of the brain called the amygdala. It's, behind your brain. So when you are indulging or you're involved in wrong patterns of thinking, it emits a chemical, so when for every thought, you think, there is a chemical that your brain emits to the world. There's this thing called law of attraction and all that, but everything revolves around the fact that our thoughts have power. So when you're thinking, it has this spiritual power by which you can pull things to you. So now talking about depression, when you are sad, it creates an imbalance in your brain. And of course, when there's an imbalance, you begin to feel the reaction in your body, and that's when you begin to feel sad, you lose enthusiasm for the things that you usually do, you don't find pleasure in things that, of course, you always, engage in. So it begins with the thoughts, the kind of thoughts that we think. And you see, it's one of the things that we take for granted. We just think that we can think anything we like, and
can't we?
We can't. Because your thoughts are powerful. There's this quote by a Chinese philosopher that says, watch your thoughts, for they become words. Watch your words, for they become your actions. So watch your actions, for they become your habits. So watch your habits, for they become your character. And watch your character, for they ultimately become your destiny. So if you are engaged in wrong patterns of thinking, for example, a rapist has to first think about the acts before it comes to reality. Everything that we do, you have to go through the process of thinking. So when there's a cognitive distortion, that's when there's an imbalance where you are not thinking the right way. That's what causes depression. And this is something that it's for me, it's a greater pandemic because than corona, coronavirus, because never in the history of man has ever and mental state been this bad. We've conquered the world, but we're yet to conquer our minds. We're yet to, and that's because we don't understand how the mind works. Now, if you notice, I've been talking about the mind and then I'm pointing at my chest. But the truth is, the mind is not in my heart or it's not my chest. The mind is here. So there are a lot of beliefs, there were a lot of wrong beliefs that we've adopted over time. In fact, scientists, they're still studying the brain to understand the magic, the potential of the brain. For example, when you sustain an injury, by nature, your wound heals. Without medicine or any extra effort.
Supposed to.
It is supposed to. It heals itself. And scientists still cannot understand how this is done. And that's because, you see, one thing that also causes depression is because we misinterpret situations. Right. Yes, we misinterpret situations. For example, you're sacked from your job. Maybe God wants a better job for you, but you instantly misinterpret it to be the end of the world, and you become sad. So the moment you misinterpret it, you're telling yourself, you're sending the signal to your subconscious mind that this is sad, this is the end, this is disaster. And the subconscious mind, because it doesn't know right from wrong, whatever you send to it is what it acts on. So it instantly, it's just like saying, guys, this guy says he's sad, he wants to be sad, and they begin to work to, orchestrate that reality that you've perpetuated. So the wrong patterns of thinking, it's the concept of thoughts and thinking patterns cannot be overemphasized.
So how do we manage our thoughts, since that is where depression stems from? Whatever the trigger, it still boils down to you thinking
the right way.
Either thinking the right way or thinking the wrong way. So how do we then begin to manage our thoughts the right way? And also recognize that if I'm thinking this way, I am going the wrong way.
Yes. Well, there's something called metacognition, which is the process of thinking about your thinking. So
interesting.
Let me break it down now. Yeah. So, for example, if someone offends you at work, naturally, what gets you upset. So when
some persons don't know until something happens.
Well, of course, there are times that something happens and then you suddenly become shocked that you're, angered by that situation. But of course, it becomes an experience and it trains you or it teaches you for the next time it happens.
Absolutely.
However, more times than ever, we know the things that usually infuriate us, trigger us. So when such things happen, you should know that, oh, I'm going to get offended by this. So you need to start thinking about your thoughts. Thoughts are going through your mind at that moment, because instantly your mind begins to suggest different things to you. Maybe you should hit him. Maybe you should report him to his boss. Do this and do that. So begin to, yes, exactly. It's called, some people call it mindfulness, becoming mindful of what you're thinking in your mind. So that's where you disrupt the pattern. Oh, I'm not supposed to do this. Okay, for example, if your boss hurts you, you know that if you do anything wrong to your boss, you may lose your job. So instantly you are forced to control your emotions. You're forced to control your behavior. So it's in that same vein that we need to also learn to, because you know that the truth is, whatever action you take, the consequences will always be, far worse than what has happened. So it begins with that, becoming mindful of your thoughts. When you begin to think negatively, the truth is it doesn't even affect the other person, it affects you. There's a saying that resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So instantly, initially when you begin to feel sad or you begin to feel angered, you're hurting yourself, but you do not know. Or you have a grudge or you have a negative emotion, you're hurting yourself. For me, I usually say that there really isn't a negative emotion. Negative emotions, we call them, but they are signals that tell us something about ourselves. So being mindful about them, knowing what they tell us. If, for example, there's this analogy that I used to give, by two guys who went into the bush to hunt. And one of them, because, I told you about the amygdala that controls the emotion, his own amygdala had been tampered with. So he couldn't feel emotion. So he saw a lion, and you know, when you see a lion, what emotion?
Take off.
Of course, you feel scared.
Yeah.
So fear is not necessarily bad. It's a feedback telling you that there is danger and you need to act. So what did this guy do? Paul, the first guy, he couldn't feel danger. So he saw a lion like a mere human, and he just there dashing, you know, towards it to kill it. And you know, a lion consumed him. But the other guy that accompanied him, he was shocked. He was initially shocked by the sight of the lion, and then seeing that he had consumed his friend, what did he do? He took off.
Right.
So that's how our emotions, you know, every emotion, they tell us something about ourselves. Secondly, we need to learn to interpret our situations the right way. It's called cognitive reframing in psychology. That is giving every situation a positive meaning. Now, for example, some few weeks ago, a friend of mine lost her father. And while we were discussing, I was trying to sympathize with her. Oh, I'm sorry that... I'm like, no, we've been praying for him to die for a while now, because he had been hospitalized. Yes,
okay.
He has been in the hospital for so long, for, you know, close to a year. And they've been spending so much, and they've been seeing him suffer. So they just felt the only way this man can rest, or the only way they can save this man from this lingering pain, is just for him to die. But of course, no one can take a knife and stab him. So when he eventually died, they interpreted it to be a positive situation. So death is not necessarily bad or good or bad. So, you know, there's a saying by Shakespeare that nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So irrespective of what happens, it's how you interpret the situation that matters. You know, I often give this analogy now. For example, when someone dies, it doesn't have any effect on your health. If someone close to you, yes, if someone close to you, it doesn't. If someone close to you should drop dead now, it doesn't affect you in any way. It's not like you feel something until you find out. The moment you find out, is the interpretation you give it that hurts you. It's not the situation. It's the interpretation that you give it that hurts you. So, for example, like I gave the analogy that you lose your job, you feel bad about it. If you were, prior to that time, nurturing a dream, nurturing perhaps a personal business somewhere, and you lose that job, you perhaps may interpret it to be, oh, now I have more time for my own
and for
other
someone
business.
who did not have a side hustle that he was nurturing,
yes,
interpret it as the end of the world.
As the end of the world. So at that time, you know, the truth is.
So how does that person, I want to focus on that person who sees it as the end of the world, how does that person begin to interpret it as, okay, perhaps this is something positive? Because this is quite, we are looking at, also we have the pandemic on the ground, and a lot of persons lost their job, lost people close to them, not because they were ill for a long time, for instance, but because the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden this person is gone. And perhaps this person might just be the breadwinner. So these are instances I would like for us to perhaps touch on. Okay,
first things first, I often say that life is no bed of roses.
Okay.
Life is no bed of roses. There's a quote by Buddha that says, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Okay.
One way or the other, we all go through one challenge or the other. What you're going through may not necessarily be what I'm going through. Perhaps you're nurturing something else. I'm nurturing the fact that, for example, I'm not married yet. That may be a pain in my own life. That may be some sort of discomfort. So life itself is warfare. And that's why we have religion, we have our spiritual beliefs and all that. So the power of positive thinking, however, cannot be overemphasized. We should always lean on the positive side of things, because for every given situation, there are usually two perspectives, the positive and the negative. So you should always opt towards the positive, because like I said, the mind itself is like a system. It's how you program it, what you tell it that it believes. I give this analogy that if you're seeing a movie and you come across this horror scene, you instantly start to get scared. You start triggering, fidgeting and all that. Meanwhile, don't you know that this is a stage play? Of course you know. So your conscious mind knows that it's staged, but your subconscious doesn't. So it's what you tell it, the message you send to the subconscious mind, that it acts on. So whenever something happens, that's why it's adequate, it's very imperative that we read. we develop our mental state, because that's what fortifies us when we go through challenges. But you know, in this part of the world, we do not really take reading. We do not take it seriously. We just think that it's nonsense. But there's power in reading. When you read, there's a quote that says that when an ape looks into a book, there's a huge probability that a human being would come out of, you know, it would be transformed into a human being. So the power in reading cannot be overemphasized. That's why I often say that, you know, one of the first things that when Angel Gabriel met Prophet Muhammad, the first thing he told him was to read. So giving every situation a positive meaning matters a lot. Right. So irrespective of the fact that you're going through tough challenges. Okay, for example, I run a prison ministry, and there was a time I went to Kirikiri to speak to the inmates and donate copies of my books. And while I was speaking to them, I was telling them, oh, next time I'm going to be here to inspire you. And they said, no, they screamed at me. No, we'll meet you outside. I was amazed, like, wow. At that moment, I started
thinking positively and had to remind you.
Yes, had to remind me. So I tell my mates, like, give them a round of applause, and then I continued. And I felt that Jesus Christ at that moment, that, you know, I had not seen a faith. So because some of them, they had perhaps been sentenced to life imprisonment. Some of them do not, but they still hold on to it. And there's something called the power of hope. It has a way of keeping you during the okay, there was this psychiatrist who, whenever he interviews his patient, he often asks them, why haven't you thought of suicide? And there's always this belief that they hold on to. I have a child to tend to. I have this dream that I want to. And that gives them hope. And that hopes help them to go on.
All right. So I see a book here. You just wrote this? Treasure in your trash. A guide to making the most of life's mess. Broken crayons, still color. Interesting. Talk to us about this.
Yes, basically just trying, because the scripture says that people perish because of lack of knowledge. And irrespective of what you go through in life, irrespective of the non-negotiable challenges that will go through in life, there will always be treasure in your trash. Imagine someone who is divorced now, and she feels it's the end of the world. There's someone somewhere perhaps looking at her and is happy. In fact, he's happy that she's divorced because he's seeing not a trash in her, he's seeing a treasure in her. So oftentimes, irrespective of what we go through, just like I give an analogy of you getting injured and your body heals itself. You know, even in your trash, there's some treasure in it. And sometimes ago I was on air speaking about this same concept, vaccination, which is the same thing as immunization. Now, the truth is that we've been fortified mentally, spiritually, such a way that nothing can actually defeat us. We can be destroyed, but we can't be defeated. You can be destroyed. What it means is that life can throw you different blows, but you can't be defeated, because the moment you do not give up in your mind, the moment you still nurture the fact that I will get up again, you've not been defeated. Right. So the process of vaccination is just infecting your system with a weakened disease, which, you know, this corona. But the thing is this, you have an adaptive immunity that instantly builds special antibodies ready to fight it, and the next time it strikes, it kills it. Now imagine, look at the things that your nature.
We can't continue. I know you go on and on about this, but then congratulations on your new book, Treasure in Your Trash, a guide to making the most of life's mess. Broken crayons, still color.
Of course.
I guess a lot of persons will need this at this time because of what is going on across the world, basically. Well done. Emotional intelligence expert